It's so nice to speak to everyone today. I am so excited about this because I have been following Brent McLeary for a long time throughout this entire Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni case. I'll admit that I think the first time I spoke about this, I was like, like what this guy is saying is pretty interesting. However, or what's coming out is pretty interesting. However, you know me, I've been on Team Amber Heard since the beginning. Like, it was almost uncharacteristic for me to fall for something like this, even a little bit. But pretty quickly, I found creators like Brent, who goes by Expatriarch, as well as more with MJ. She's great on threads. And I've been dying to speak to one of them at any point. And when this discovery dump came out, I was just like, we need to get into it because a lot of people see headlines and they don't have time to get into all the rigmarole. And there's so much misinformation out there. So, yeah, I welcome Brent. Thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for talking to me. And yes, there is a ton of misinformation and it seems like it never stops. Like they never run out of things to talk about.
Well, a lot of it's made up, That's like part of the problem is that you can kind of take anything that you see, and if you come into it with you can get your confirmation bias if it's available to you. And this is like, something that I found myself becoming more and more passionate about. I followed it throughout this beginning of the trial, of course, Amber and Johnny, and then more recently, the Karen Reed trial was something that I was following. There was a huge misinformation, propaganda type thing going on there. And now we're back to this. And so I am so frustrated. And I'm sure that that's a little bit of what has inspired you to go through this type of work. I guess I want to ask you, like, how did you get into this space? And you've made a very good point before we started about how does anyone trust a guy in this space? I mean, Baldoni himself was a male feminist. I don't know if you would use those words, but tell me about you a little bit.
Yeah, so didn't really kind of plan to get into this. Basically, I had a TikTok account which I used to watch TikToks with my wife in bed at night and just added like a core of creators that I would follow. And I would constantly see them having to fight with men in their comments, battle of the creators, kind of combating a lot of this misogynistic misinformation about, women are actually more violent or lesbians have the highest rate of domestic violence. And it just frustrated me so much that I wanted to start like combating it and putting out like, no, actually, this is what studies show. This is what the information is, and sort of build a platform on pushing back on a lot of that misogynistic rhetoric and misinformation. So when this lawsuit dropped, and essentially you see this massive tidal wave of misinformation and misogyny and victim shaming and blaming going on, that was really what kind of drew me into this lawsuit of like, okay, I really feel like I need to add my voice to this conversation.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for doing that. I mean, it's not easy work either. Like I know you probably get so much hate. I actually one of my a friend of mine that I met through talking about the Karen Reed case, she had mentioned to me like, "Oh, this guy has me blocked." And I was thinking like, "Don't take it personally. Like I think her account might be on private." And she probably left some comment being like, "I don't think what you're saying is important." She had said it was probably something like that. And I said, like, when you are dealing with a misinformation campaign and sort of taking that head on, you're going to run into a lot of bots and a lot of people that are just sort of like leaving hate comments. And I think sometimes for the purposes of like keep going, like you might want to be quick with the block button. I found with Karen Reed, I just didn't want to do that because I thought that their comments were so outrageous that it was like it's better to let them tell on themselves. But with this, you know, I think people were recruited a lot in comment sections through this case. And of course, there were like the Candace Owens of the world and the people who were just putting out misinformation. But I think the comment section is where a lot of people really got converted, is like going there and seeing just hundreds and hundreds of people rejecting whatever you put forth. Like I get clown emojis on every post I post
Same.
about this. But yeah. So I guess I want to ask you, like, I mean, did I ask you a question prior to this? Sorry, I might be ADHDing out.
No, but I mean, like your point of yes, we did see like a lot of like comments in this, right? And I've been talking on the like pushing back against misogyny for a few years now on TikTok. And so I'm no stranger to people coming into my comment sections and saying, you're a cuck, you're a simp, you don't know what you're talking about, you're an idiot, clown emoji, all the rest of it, right?
Uh-huh.
And a lot worse, right? A lot of times the accusations go to you're creepy, there's something wrong with you, you're doing this because you have your own skeletons in your closet, this kind of thing. So I'm not a stranger to any of that. But with this, talking about the Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni, there was definitely a different sense of like the comments were very different that we'd see. It was all accounts that were private, had no followers. And so very early on, I made a decision that I was going to be very liberal with my block button. And I apologize to your friend if they got caught up in it, but I wanted to
No, it's
cultivate
she's strong.
but I wanted to cultivate a space when we talked about this that was very pro survivor, pro, I don't want to say victim, but pro victim, right? Like, we want to cultivate that space where we were kind of creating that atmosphere of, we don't know necessarily whether everything is true or not, but we're going to wait for the trial to do it. But we are going to combat on the misinformation. We're not going to use this as a situation we're going to attack or doubt and go with basically best faith, right? We're going to give benefit of the doubt on the side of the person making these accusations. And so it was very important for me to cultivate that space. And that's been some of the feedback that I've got of like, that's been really important of just having a place on the internet that doesn't have all of the screaming and the toxicity and those comments. And unfortunately, that means like the hard part is knowing what's authentic and what's not. And so unfortunately, that sometimes means, hey, maybe somebody gets blocked who really does like genuinely in good faith believe Baldoni's story and wants to support or maybe doubts Blake Lively's take on events.
Well, I mean, I think there's okay, 2 things here. I mean, I'll say that I think Blake Lively is sort of she's an imperfect victim, right? There was sort of
Mhm.
already a line out the door to not really side with her, not only just because of some personal choices she's made or some statements she's made. I mean, I do think that while some of the things she said are harmful, like I view her as sort of a big dork. And like that is, I find that endearing. And I know what it feels like to be put on the spot with a microphone in front of you. That doesn't necessarily get easier just because you've reached a certain level of fame. Actors are meant to act and the press stuff is a whole different animal. So and of course, like being aligned with Taylor Swift, can be a great thing unless it's a terrible thing. But I always was sort of like indifferent to Blake. Like I try to always give people the benefit of the doubt. But then when I really started to read what the claims were, I think that New York Times piece was really significant. And, what we should want for ourselves is what we should also want for our enemy. I really do believe that. Just because I don't want anyone I know to be sexually harassed in the workplace and then I would say even more so retaliated against in the press. I mean, through one of these very powerful modern campaigns, like that is just for me that's the bare minimum you can do, I think, as a woman, is just say, "No one deserves this." Like, "Nah, I don't care if I don't like you. Like, you still don't deserve it, right?" Do you do this in conjunction with your wife?
So yeah, my wife is not like involved in helping me do the content, but I absolutely run everything I do through my wife and make sure that she's involved in it. And a large part of that is because of the harassment I've faced. I've been doxxed, she's been doxxed. And so it's very important to me that when we make a decision, we do so as a household and a family of like, hey, I'm going to put out a video that could cause some pushback. Do we feel strongly about this, that this needs to be said? And there's been a couple of times where she's gone, I love your heart. No, or she's told me that like that's too much, tone it down a little. But yeah, I mean, I value her opinion greatly, and so yeah, she's done done a great job as my unpaid editor for the last 3 years.
Well, that's it's hard when you're like a fighter. I wish that my personality wasn't like this a little bit. I think my life would be a lot more simple if I didn't feel like I needed to take up for oftentimes unpopular narratives, right? Like I would have so much more peace And I'd probably be doing better in the creator fund amongst other things, but, it's just feels like the right thing to when it feels like the right thing to do, how can you not do it, right? Really quickly, let's talk about some creators on the other side of this because there have been many people and they're in this discovery as well that have, the idea that Blake Lively has doxed a bunch of TikTok creators. Do you want to speak to that at all?
I think it's hard, right? So I think the first thing is yes, right? She sent out a subpoena to request information from various different platforms about the information of the users behind some of those accounts. We still to this day do not know why, right? I think there was like 107 or something like that in total, or 140. So we don't know why. These are typically very normal subpoenas that go out requesting for information. A lot of times, if you find an account that is being defamatory towards you, that is your first stop, right? And so that you can order to get information about who's behind the account so that you may then be able to take further legal action to them. But on the flip side, as a content creator, I can understand how terrifying that would be, right? To know that there's a subpoena
Sure.
out there asking for your information, especially given that a lot of these creators have talked about how they were not involved in the smear campaign. They weren't talking to anybody on Baldoni's team. They weren't being paid to make content. And it could be that they unknowingly had their content boosted on behalf of them, right? And so there's no wrongdoing by them. And then suddenly that information is being shared or being requested. I can understand that that would be uncomfortable.
Yeah. I mean, so that Popcorn Planet guy, he had one of the first YouTube channels. When I typed in this, Lively v Baldoni into YouTube, I knew I was probably going to get some bad stuff, but I was listening to it in the car. This was right after the New York Times piece had dropped. And this is a guy who claims to be an industry insider. He claims that he's worked with Reynolds in the past and that he just needs to tell the truth, not necessarily about how Ryan's a bad guy, but, he's going to risk that professional relationship because he feels like he can see what's going on here. And I mean, my little tattletale ass, I think, tagged Ryan Reynolds in it and was like, hey, this guy's talking about you. But I wanna say as someone who has worked in the industry in pretty much, like, kind of all lanes at different times over the past 20 years, like, as soon as I saw what she was doing with this New York Times piece and that there had been a formal complaint filed here in California and also, like, that sort of angle she was going about it, I have to say that I don't recall ever seeing a lawsuit, anything quite like this. I know with Megyn Kelly and the other women at Fox that they did sue for sexual harassment, but the retaliation piece, specifically using bots, I had never seen anything like that before. And so I recognized right away that this was a very careful decision that Blake and Ryan had made, probably as a couple, by going through like every single option of how poorly things could go for them, because there's a reason why people don't typically file a lawsuit like this. They hope to work again, right? And so it really stood out to me as something that was definitely very genuine and definitely very something that went through a lot of risk assessment and something where do we have the evidence? Do we have it backed up? I couldn't it was even worse when I was reading Baldoni's lawsuit, his countersuit, because I was reading it. I remember I went to Islands, which is a burger chain out here, and I was, had a glass of Sauvignon Blanc and like my little gluten-free cheeseburger. And I was reading it. I was like, I can't believe this shit. Like, I cannot. This is, first of all, it's a storybook. Secondly, at no point does he ever deny that he sexually harassed her. In fact, like he signed off on a 24-point list of things that he did, which is just people are so naive if you think that anyone is just, like putting their signature on it. Like, I don't know, maybe like you would if you're going to some sort of amusement park or trampoline place. Like, I'll sign this. I know it probably, I can't sue them if they kill me, but it's just a risk you take. No one is going to do that. Baldoni is not going to sign a document like that under duress. That is a whole separate issue. So I think that all resonated with me as someone who just has been around here for a long time and who I feel like, it's not super personal to me, but I do feel like there's been situations where I've been really exploited in the workplace. And, like the option of going to HR just like didn't even exist, I feel, in my mind. So we're standing with Blake and I even put a bet on it on Kalshi. That's how strongly I feel. I got it in early when people were favoring Baldoni, and that has skyrocketed. Blake's has skyrocketed since this discovery dump came out. So let's get into the discovery dump if you don't mind. This is why we're
Yeah,
here today.
absolutely.
So, like, I feel like you are way more in this on the day to day than I am. So, let's talk about what stood out to you from this.
Yeah, that's a polite way of putting obsessed. Yeah, so they have recently unsealed all of the evidence right now. They're at the stage where they're doing these massive motions for summary judgment. So before they get to the trial, they're deciding the facts of the case, what is absolutely undisputed, so they can strip down the case before it goes to trial to streamline things. And both sides presented their arguments, and I think each one has like over 300 exhibits each. And so now they've kind of figured out what they can show the public and unseal everything. And so a lot has come out. And of course, both sides have drawn lines on like, oh, this evidence totally validates us. And what you've seen on the Blake Lively side is a lot of people talking about the fact that it was not just Blake, right? It's almost every woman who worked on that production had complaints about Baldoni, had raised issues about his inappropriateness, and did not want to work with him or promote the movie with him. Meanwhile, on the Baldoni side, people have gone, Taylor Swift called him a bitch. And you're like, okay, how is that even at all relevant to any of this?
I know. They'd hate to see my text, which, by the way, I would print on a billboard if it came to defending one of my friends. I understand that Taylor Swift and I have slightly different stakes in life, but I mean, I thought that was mild.
Agreed, agreed. But I think what's interesting is, Baldoni had put together his $400 million lawsuit. And in he had countered by saying that no, what had happened here is Blake had made all of these demands and these threats. She was not a producer. She took over the movie. And in all of the unsealing that we've seen, none of those threats have come out, right? We haven't seen any evidence of them. There's no, you will do this or I will ruin your career, Mr. Baldoni, right? There's not a single one of those. And so instead, the narrative now has kind of changed to, well, is what she's claiming really sexual assault? And can she really complain given she got so much control over the movie? And I think the big reveal that happened with the unsealing of the documents is that Baldoni's narrative from the start has been, she took over my movie. I was director and producer. She ended up editing my cut of the movie. She was not a producer. She forced her way into making all of these script rewrites and doing all these stuff until we had to give her a producer credit and then a PGA mark. And what we found is the original contract between Columbia Pictures and Justin Baldoni. He never had a movie in the first place. It was never his to own. He had tried to fight for Final Cut, and Columbia's like, we don't know you, right? You've made 2-3 minor movies. You are not a big A-list director. We're not spending 25 million and trusting that your cut will not be garbage. And they baked a bake-off in there. So the plan was always that Justin's cut of the movie would go up against another cut, Sony's cut, and he would have to score certain scores. I believe it was 85% in the top 2 boxes and above 70 indefinite recommends. So he'd have to score that or beat Sony's cut by 7 points. Blake does end up making a cut because she's so terrified by what she's seen in the dailies with him improvising and adding intimate content. She gets to advocate and make Sony's cut. And Baldoni's cut never meets the scores that is required in his contract for him to have ever had Final Cut.
Right. Yeah, it sounded to me as though she had a much better grasp on the material, which would make sense because, she's been making more movies for a long time as her husband. Like she seems to there's certain things that you sort of begin to intuit when you are recording for something. For years I just did videography, which is a completely separate category than making a major film, but you kind of have a better sense of like, okay, I can use that. We don't need to take any more cuts of that or any more takes of that. Exactly. You're sort of editing in camera, if it makes
Mhm.
sense. If you're
Mhm.
watching dailies, you can kind of mentally do it. And I just don't think what I was seeing her sort of express is that he didn't really have that skill or that ability. And to your point about, her stealing this movie away from him, let's just say that is true. If she bullied him about wardrobe, if she was being overly demanding about this, that, or the other thing, that means he's a bad director. You have let go of your project if you have talent like calling the shots. That means you're a bad director. That's like one of the other things that really stood out to me is he kept talking throughout his lawsuit, which has now been thrown out, as though like, my hands were tied. I couldn't do this. And it's like, well, then
Mhm.
you're just a bad director. And this is also once all of this started coming out, I mean, you could almost take every single complaint that they had about Blake and match it not even just 1 for 1, but like 2 for 1 with Baldoni's career. I mean, in his very short career, he has, I guess, I mean, like from what I've heard, what we know, the record that he has in terms of nearly every single production that he has touched. I don't know anything about Jane the Virgin, but I do know that none of them have said anything in his favor. Like, I mean, the guy seems like he can't get through anything. So, yeah, that was definitely something that stood out to me throughout all of this as well. Is it's just like, well, it sounds like you weren't very good at your job to begin with.
Yeah, and very early on, I think when this came all out, one of the cinematographers who worked with him on My Last Days, his documentary about people with terminal illness, had commented and came out and said that, he'd worked with him. I think he worked with him on season 2 and found him to be like the most performative person, that, he was basically manipulating and using these people with terminal illnesses to basically promote himself and didn't really care about the issues of the people, and just found him to just be very, very fake. And so that came out. And then, of course, through the course of this lawsuit and through this unsealing as well, like we have the feedback from Claire Ayub on Empire Waste, who had felt
Mhm.
that he and the other Wayfarer, his associates at Wayfarer, had been verbally abusive and were not conducive to a safe set, and didn't want him to promote the movie given that he was involved in this lawsuit, but had also asked that he be removed from set from Empire Waste as well. So you're starting to see a pattern. One of the things that came out in the unsealing is his podcast host, Liz Plank,
Yes.
worked with him for years on Man Enough. And when the lawsuit came out, she ended her relationship with the podcast. And people kind of suspected something was going on because she was at the premiere of It Ends With Us. But instead of being with Baldoni, who was the co-host of her podcast, or Jamie Heath, who was the co-host of her podcast, she took pictures alone and she tagged Blake Lively. And a lot of people from there kind of sussed that something was going on. And in the unsealing, we found out that basically back in April of 2023, so before filming started, Ryan Reynolds is reaching out to her saying, hey, like, I don't understand Baldoni. Like, help me. I need some guidance of like, they clearly were struggling with him not being who he said he was. And, Liz had said, like, I warned Blake. I've seen the red flags. I'd hoped he'd changed, but he hadn't. And so we're seeing a lot of commentary from all of the women that have worked with Baldoni that like, this has been an ongoing problem. This is not a Blake thing.
I know. I think that at the time when Plank stepped away from the podcast, I remember being like, "Oh, I wonder if she just can't handle the heat." But to know that
Yeah.
she has been, I mean, the fact that she warned Blake about this, I mean, says everything. And even, I think she even expressed maybe a level of guilt if she hadn't worded herself strongly enough about how things were. But again, like, this is sort of an industry where you don't trash people that you work with, even if they are brutal. Like, you might have a light touch when you express something like, I don't, good luck. Like, I don't know. Like, he's questionable. I cannot believe how outrageous Justin's behavior was from start to finish. I want to say something that really stood out to me, and maybe it's a bit salacious, but it's one of the things where it's like top to bottom. The guy was, if you give him credit for one thing, he was very thorough. Inviting the male cast and some of the crew to go to a Russian bath with him, which I don't think like the Baldoni folks realize is like, that's where you get naked and you sit in a series of hot and cold pools. That is a really uncomfortable thing for your boss to ask you to do. It would be completely inappropriate if you worked at, I don't know, like State Street Bank or something like that. But the idea of someone doing it on a movie set, and yeah, Hollywood tends to be a bit more casual, but like the extent to which, and you have to recall, like, remember that all these all of these same people are seeing him do things to women in the workplace that are incredibly inappropriate. I think that it all just none of it helped each other. He really, like, spectacularly screwed himself in some of these
Yeah,
ways.
and I think that's the bit that really just didn't connect for me with Justin, right? This is somebody who has platformed himself for the last 7 years on talking specifically about these topics, about how to address boundaries with other people and how to make sure that those places are safe. And then he's like, hey, he was inviting all the department heads to come to Russian baths with him. And there's an exchange between Alex Sachs, the producer, and Andy Giannetti at Sony's representative, where they're talking on June 15th in 2024, and she's listing out like just everything and everybody that had a problem with him. And she brings up like, hey, do you remember I called Andy Davis? And he's, was like, Andy, he's inviting the department heads to a Russian baths. And I was like, what do I do? And Andy was like, you have to tell him you can't do that. And you're like you said, like, this is just basic. Like, this would not be appropriate in any workplace environment.
Yeah.
But for somebody who has talked about this, right, who talks to other men, who does this in this space, like, I struggle to connect with like how somebody just generally doesn't know that and can walk through with that level of clueless, but especially somebody who is supposedly an educator on this topic. That was where, for me, it's a lot of it is like, how do you not know this?
Yeah, well, I'll just say that I remember, like, it almost comes back to me, like, do you ever have a flicker of an old dream or something? We consume so much on TikTok that, like, you sometimes forget, and I remember when his podcast first launched, those videos were good. Like, there was a couple clips of him that were going around TikTok where people were being like, "I don't know, this guy from Jane the Virgin's being, like, really weird. He has this feminist podcast," and I'm like, "I don't know
Mm.
if I don't buy into this shtick." And so that had sort of come back to me, and it's so it makes total sense, as Blake said, in her text to Skellner, where she was saying, like, no, it makes total sense. Like, the guy is running away from something. And in the process, he's basically, he's like performing. He's doing this whole thing because he's desperately running away from something. And that sounds about right. I I guess I wanna ask you a little bit about, like, the Jamie Heath of it all,
Mm.
because there's a lot of inappropriate stuff about Jamie Heath, and I know that Blake had to sort of whittle her complaint down to about 4 things that felt specifically like sexual harassment. I know one was sort of improvised nuzzling and touching, and I know that Justin Baldoni tried to argue that, like, that's not gender based because what if they did that on Heated Rivalry or something, which is just like, okay, like, topic of the week. And that there was also the birthing scene where we saw pictures that made me very uncomfortable to see because I know we were never supposed to see that with Blake with her modesty garment on. And I don't think I know a woman who would be comfortable doing that anywhere, let alone in a workplace with one of Justin's weird cult friends staring at her crotch basically all day.
Yeah.
Jamie Heath bursting in her room when she was breastfeeding her child and with her breast exposed. For me, I feel like it's one hell of a team up between Jamie Heath, who I think has a lot more experience in the industry, if I'm not completely off base. I think he has a lot more experience, and I wonder a little bit of did he give Justin permission in some ways through his own lack of professionalism, or is this just like a predator meetup? What do you think?
How to coach this nicely. I think, again, right? So this is another thing, being in this space, and you talked about like how do you trust other men, that again doesn't line up for me, right? Is I feel if you're an advocate in this space and you're talking on this, a good measure of the work that you're doing is the people that you surround yourself with. Are they keeping you accountable? Are they calling out those red flags? Are they having audibles with you of like, hey, maybe don't show a coworker a video of your wife giving birth? Now, there's some debate over, was she in the middle of giving birth or was it after? But like, don't show naked videos of your wife. Just seems very like that should be something. And it doesn't seem to have happened with Baldoni. Not only has he got Jamie Heath, who, like you said, was also in his doing his own thing. The unsealing has brought out the depositions of Vivian Baker, right, award-winning makeup artist, over 70 credits, Avengers, Pirates of the Caribbean. She knows what a safe set looks like. Anne Carroll, hairstylist, Star Trek, Man of Steel, X-Men, knows what a safe set looks like. Jamie Hayes bursts into the trailer when, like you said, she's exposed, she's breastfeeding, one of her the other breast is exposed. You would immediately see that and go, my bad, I'll leave, or I'll talk to you from outside. All right. Like, there's a whole way of doing that. He refused to leave, ended up looking at her in through the mirror so that he could see her exposed. Like, just gross. There's Brian Friedman, right? That he hired on as his lawyer, right? You're telling me
Brian
the only
Friedman is
lawyer you could,
so troublesome.
but you're telling me like that's the only lawyer you could find. And then, there's also the fact that he hires the PR firm that has worked for a decade with Scooter Braun. And then, it also found out in the unsealing that Wayfarer had created a script that they worked with a TikTok creator, or I think former ESPN reporter Sage Steele. She's now a content creator, kind of does a lot of not just sports, but political commentary. They worked with her to create a video attacking Blake Lively after the thing came out. Wrote a whole script for her, gave her talking points. There's text messages where they're like, change this. We think you should say this instead, after they've said they didn't do a smear campaign. So they get her to make this video. There's an email from Steve Sarowitz where he's talking about introducing himself and Brian Friedman to David Keyes, the former spokesperson for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who resigned in disgrace for his own allegations. So, like, when you talk about, like, is he just creating a circle of predators? I'm like, again, if you're in this space, one would be enough, right? Where you say, hey, I'm not going to work with that person. I'm sure they're fantastic. Maybe the allegation's true or not, but I'm going to draw a line. I'm not going to. But to like assemble like an Avengers team of men who are problematic, it's hard not to conclude everything about his platform was fake and a performance.
It's interesting because Blake has, she has stumbled in the public eye. She's also was like a victim of like the fappening, for example. And I have wondered at times if, I mean, listen, like she's by far like the biggest name in the movie, but I have wondered at times if casting someone with as many complications as Blake was not a bug, but a feature for them. Like, well, if anything happens, like, it won't be difficult to turn this around on her.
Well, I think that's the trap that they laid, right? So we talk about like her taking over the movie. She wanted to sign on as a producer. Wayfarer could not get anybody else to sign on the movie. Part of the unsealing is there's text messages where they're talking about nobody else wants to sign on, nobody else wants to do this movie. It's Blake or nothing, right? So Wayfarer really had this opportunity to either hire a big Hollywood actress with a lot of clout, a lot of skill, or somebody who was more unknown, and it wouldn't have been a $350 million blockbuster, right? So they bet on Blake. And she said, hey, I want to come on as a producer. And they said, no, we'll give you an executive producer credit. But there's a text message from Jamie to her manager, Warren, saying, we're excited about her coming on as an EP. Oh, so this is January 4th. So this is before the movie starts. The producer credit isn't going to change for us, but I believe you've already accepted that. I will tell you off the record that should she come on and demonstrate she's filling a role as a producer, we'll at least discuss it again. So, of course, they're telling her, come into this movie, help, right? And you can see constantly in the messages from Baldoni, he's asking for her information. Help me to rewrite the script. He's asking what's her thoughts on this. He's telling her, like, give me all of this. He's reaching out to Blake to ask Ryan for like, I think it was like for other choices of the crew. He's like, has he worked with this person? What does he think of this for all of these different choices? So like he was utilizing that excess, right? And the movie obviously has Taylor Swift's song in the trailer. Blake also talked in her PGA letter that, she'd hired on other people. She worked with Shane Reed as the editor. So this movie isn't just Blake Lively. It is all of Blake Lively's talent and connections, all of the clout that she was able to use to get this thing good. And it made them a ton of money. And then, of course, like you said, at the moment that she's a disagreeable woman and isn't doing as she's told, well, then all of a sudden she's nothing but a problem and everything she's doing is too much. She's taking over. She's controlling.
It's crazy because, like, the Ryan element of it all, like, if you go online, they'll try to tell you all day that, like, Ryan Reynolds is no one likes Ryan Reynolds. When, like, in reality, like, Ryan Reynolds is like every sort of American. You walk into a bar in middle America and you ask any guy, like, if you had to sleep with a man, who would you pick? And they're all like, oh, Ryan Reynolds. I mean, that is every average American male's favorite guy, right? I don't even really care about celebrities, but I like Ryan Reynolds. Like, that is very much the thing. It's not based in reality at all. And yeah, like I think definitely having resources that, the option of getting resources through Ryan was very attractive to them. And knowing how hard he will go to sort of like, he's really great with the marketing stuff. I mean, he's excellent with it. He's a great businessman. And so, one thing that I think is like kind of nice about it, and it shouldn't always have to be the case, but I think for a case that could be really precedent setting here, it's so awesome for Blake that she has a Ryan Reynolds, like, to have a husband who is backing you up as hard as he is, like, it's not just a woman who, is an imperfect victim, it's a woman who's an imperfect victim who also has a powerhouse husband who is standing right beside her, and the way that they have gone after him in these smears, I mean, they had Candace Owens trying to convince us that Ryan Reynolds was a wife beater. Meanwhile, all of this discovery comes out. We see all these emails, and he's just a true blue champion for his wife in every single way. And not in a sort of, not overstate. He's not overstating anything. He's just really being an incredible advocate for her and a very proud partner. And I think that that is something that I don't think they accounted for any of this ever catching up to them, but I don't think they accounted for someone like him to say, "You know what? Like, let's do this. Let's do this lawsuit. Like, we'll take the hit." And come out the other side of it. I think that that's it's wonderful that they have each other, and I do believe based on what we're seeing so far that Blake has a really solid shot at winning this. What are some other things that you have been seeing in terms of like chronic misinformation or chronic sort of like things that are interpreted wrong or assumed that have come out in this discovery?
So I think the big one is, her taking over the movie. You know, as we talked about, that's just not how movies work. You don't just get to come on set and say, hey, I'm going to be in the edit room. It doesn't matter how much clout you have. She could have only ever done this with Sony's approval, and Sony did, right? And in those text messages of Sony just praising her for her marketing skills, getting the trailer to blow up, like they're very happy about the amount of money that she's bringing in and the eyeballs and attention. But it's also interesting that Sony at the same time don't want to advocate for her. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to say anything. And
I
even now in
know.
like the depositions from Sony, they're being very guarded. Like she had a call with Sony to detail all of the harassment claims. And it's in Baldoni's complaint that they say basically, Lively told Sony all of these things. Then Sony told us that she had told them all these things. And you look at Sony's deposition and they're like, I don't remember what was in that phone call. And it's like, really? Because Wayfarer remember what was in that phone call and you don't say anything. So I think that's like one of the big ones. I think the other as well is just generally, right, this idea that none of this counts as sexual harassment, or she's not arguing sexual harassment. She's actually arguing hostile workplace. But hostile
Mhm.
workplace is one of the two forms of sexual harassment, the other being quid pro quo. So she is still holding on to these sexual harassment claims. But the big thing for me is that 17-point letter of protections to the workplace, because regardless of whether you think in the first phase anything inappropriate happened or whose side you take it on, it's clear that she felt uncomfortable and she wrote them a letter. The moment the lawyers get involved to say, hey, our client's not coming back to work unless you agree to these protections, it's clear she feels that way. And all of
Yeah.
those protections were about having more control over the nudity riders, having a final approval of all shots, and making sure that there was a Sony representative on set and an additional producer on set, all of which talk as though it's a safety issue, not that she's trying to take control. And so that is workplace accommodations. That's a protected activity. And in it, they said they would not retaliate, and yet they did. So I feel like just that piece of the case is enough to make it like, this is very clear that something happened. She was uncomfortable with what happened, and they signed these protections and said they wouldn't retaliate, and then they did, because it's clear from like May he just grew increasingly paranoid, scared, insecure, them unfollowing him, that all of this was going to leak out.
So that's where I want to, if we can just, for people who don't really understand the smear element of it, I think like my regular listeners sort of would know where I'm going with this, and Karen Reed, we had Turtle Boy, and Deb versus Heard, we had a very similar thing. So Jones Works PR was originally the company that Justin was a client of, right? And then Jones Works, there was, I think, was it Melissa Nathan and Jennifer Abel who left Jones Works and started their own company?
No, just Jennifer Abel. So Melissa Nathan used to work at Hiltzik Strategies under Matthew Hiltzik, who did represent Depp, who also Hiltzik had also represented or was the spokesperson for Epstein as well. So
Right.
yeah. And one of the things in this is that it became known that Justin Baldoni had hired Melissa Nathan. She left Hiltzik to form this a PR crisis firm called the agency group Tech. And it got released in the Hollywood Reporter that he had hired Depp's crisis PR, right? Really bad, made him look very shady. And they blamed it on Blake Lively's team. Oh, she planted this to make us look bad, all of this stuff. And it came out that basically Melissa Nathan herself planted that article with Pam McClintock, and there's text messages between the two of them like, hey, when's the article coming out, all of this stuff. And that just is wild to me that like they were deliberately instigating this. The company he hired, he was paying them I think was it 15 or 25 grand.
No,
15. He was paying him 15 grand. He was paying him 15 grand a month to protect his reputation and deal with this crisis. And she's there launching the stories that are like, oh, Baldoni's shady. He hired Depp's PR. And she's like holding that up to then say, see, this is why you need us, Justin. That is a wild thing.
no, it's insane, and the billionaire backer that Baldoni has is definitely footing the bill for that, because when you look at the sheer amount of money that has gone into protecting Baldoni and Wayfair by extension of that, I mean, this guy, Ben, what is his last name?
Who?
Oh, Brian, the guy who's bankrolling the billionaire.
That I don't know. So the billionaire is Steve Sarowitz. I don't know who's
Oh,
bankrolling him.
okay, Steve Sarowitz. I was don't worry, it's my
Okay.
own way of remembering things. So he said that he wanted to do to Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds what Israel did to Hamas, except for two people instead of, I don't know, what was the number, 130,000 or something at the time. Like that is beyond villain shit. And at what point is that even worth it? How does one get to that point? I understand when you have billions, your discretion level is different in terms of, I don't know, is it really worth doing that? But the extent to which they were willing to go to, with the bot farms and everything else, that is done through that guy, Jed something in Texas, right? Who has the bot farms. Did you note that? Did you see that tweet the other day that someone was going through the bot accounts, and now on Twitter, there's that excellent feature where you can click on the account and see where they're based. I don't know why Elon gave us that, but I guess thanks for once. Someone noted that a lot of the bot accounts were coming through VPNs in Canada. And I was wondering, this is just a little theorizing, nothing formal, but do you think that that might have anything to do with the fact that Reynolds is from Canada?
I don't know. I think that definitely has helped, right? And the conspiracy theories on Reddit are all over it, right? This is Ryan Reynolds. There was a TikTok content creator who saw that somebody in their comments was from Australia who was disagreeing with them, and they accused them of being Ryan Reynolds. And now the latest theory is, well, they're from Australia, so this isn't Ryan Reynolds who's looking on TikTok to go argue with Baldoni creators all day. No. This must be Hugh Jackman instead. And it's just crazy.
Oh, I'm
But
so sure.
but the thing for me with Jed Wallace is, he in his he put out a declaration very early saying, hey, I was only doing monitoring. I was just looking at social media. I wasn't doing anything else. And obviously all of the text messages have come out, and the messages from him are him talking about, let's take action on this. I'm going to do this. There's messages from him with his other clients where he's talking about they have SEO problems. He's going to, change the algorithm. They're going to work on it. There was even talk of, there's a Reddit discussion that he's having on behalf of a client saying, hey, I'm going to throw a bunch of upvotes the stuff we want and downvotes. So they're very clearly talking about they are actively manipulating social media. And so, like I said, we know from other documents that got unsealed that, they talk to content creators like Sage Steele, like as you talked about Popcorn Planet, who's in his own lawsuit to hand over the text messages that he had a 6-month conversation with, it appears to be Melissa Nathan, who was feeding him information and provoking him to like do content and giving him stuff to do stories on. We know that they were also feeding Billy Bush, Candace Owens, Dumois, like a whole
I
host of
have to
reporters.
say, I caught on to the FOMOA subreddit very early, and I was tracking this probably I was thinking the wrong way. But FOMOA has always been it was the only spot online if you wanted to go read a bunch of people who supported Amber Heard. It was like one of the only safe spaces. And so when this case broke, I know they have problems with Taylor Swift. And I know that the sub is very, it's the place that if like some beloved celebrity dies, like you click on the post and the first comment is like, yeah, but I don't know, like, he was arrested for drunk driving in 1998. Like, can we let this go? And it's like, guys, like, give it a fucking rest. Like, oh my gosh. But, I noticed very early on with the Blake posts that about this, just the It Ends With Us drama. The only positive comments were at the very, very bottom, completely downvoted, and they all had 42 to 46 downvotes. And I got to a point where I was like, is FOMOA, like, where are they compromised? Are they working with them? But now that makes total sense that they're doing like a, upvote, downvote farm in there. And I still can't believe how out of control the FOMOA subreddit is. If I hadn't been banned from there for talking about how much I love John Cena, I would send them a message about about how they need to get it together. But yeah, okay. So can we just briefly talk about who Jen Abel is in all of this? Because I'm now in a little bit of a mini scrap with Jamila Jamil. I realized that like big
Somebody take
names
her phone, please.
I realize that big names like Taylor Swift or even someone like Jamila Jamil winds up getting roped into this because it's something else to talk about that's not the actual claims and the things that matter. However, I have always thought it was so interesting, and I guess maybe I was wrong about my understanding of her support of Amber because I think that she was on a short list of people that sort of were vocal Amber supporters. It was very rare that celebrities said anything at all, but there was plenty who were like liking Johnny Depp's post. Amber was kind of like not really posting at that point online anymore. And I guess I got that wrong, but she is someone who kind of posits herself as like this big, I don't know, this big feminist, as someone who like, listen, I have friends that sometimes they're on a good one, and I am often the friend who is sometimes on a good one. About, like this Karen Reed thing really kind of threw a lot of people for a loop where they're like, Molly, why do you give a fuck like this? And I'm like, because it's wrong. And so I have plenty of friends who just simply will not engage with me on that topic. And I thought it was so interesting that Jamila Jamil was not just in her friend Jennifer Abel's text about this, but that she was sending, a lot of TikToks to her and a lot of things that I think were really sort of fueling the fire. At one point, there was a screenshot between the two of them, and this is one that I haven't spoken about on TikTok or any other platform yet, but there was a screenshot of a People magazine article where at the end of it, they made a comment about how people on the It Ends With Us set referred to Justin Baldoni's behavior being chauvinistic and
Borderline abusive.
yes, borderline abusive. And Jen Abel says, I talked them down from calling him a predator. And like Jamila Jamil writes back to that, well, it's a good thing that you got borderline abusive in there because now she can't use predator. And I am like just sitting there like kind of shocked because I would think that she would understand the nuances of this as a celebrity, particularly a celebrity that has gotten quite a bit of shit over the years. And I've done a little digging around. I can't figure out what the hell their connections are. Like in terms of Jamila, I was even looking. I'm like, did her boyfriend like once work with Blake, or Has she ever worked with Ryan Reynolds? I'm just trying to figure it out. And I think that the conclusion I've come to is that I think Jamila Jamil is incredibly online.
That is what we've seen over the past couple of days. Arguing with people in her DMs, and now there's screenshots of them everywhere. I don't really necessarily know her relationship with Jennifer Abel, how close they are, but you would think that your publicist and PR would the first screenshot hits Twitter, and you would think the publicist would take your phone from you and say, "Stop arguing with people online. You will never win. Just don't do it. It doesn't look good." But yeah, to kind of circle back to what you were talking about Jennifer Abel, right? To do the setup, and let's get into Jamila Jamil of it all. Justin Baldoni had a publicist that he had for 7 years, Jones Works. She represented not just Justin Baldoni, but also Wayfarer as well. She hired a woman, Jennifer Abel, brought her onto her team as a VP to kind of take over the entertainment division. And she was the person who was assigned to Baldoni's account, if you will. Her and another man, Matthew Mitchell, both worked that account. What seems to have happened is that Jennifer Abel has decided at some point to set up on her own. She created RWA Communications and go strike out as her own, PR agency, which totally fine to do. What she also tried to do, however, was take clients from Jones Works with her. And she tried to do so in like the worst way possible. She was not only, what had happened is that Stephanie Jones had realized there was a defamatory website about her that seemed to have some details, like as if it was written by somebody who'd worked for her. And she suspected either an employee or former employee, hired a forensic team. And this is how all of this started. She then
Wow.
finds out that Jennifer Abel was working with Business Insider alongside Melissa Nathan to plant a negative article defaming Stephanie Jones, that Tag and Melissa Nathan were behind the website. And we have Tag employees who, under oath, have testified that they were asked to work on copy for the website that has appeared. And so Jennifer Abel convinces Wayfarer to hire Tag. Stephanie Jones advises against it. She has a history with Melissa Nathan. They had interacted when Stephanie Jones represented Scooter Braun. And Scooter Braun's business partner, David Bolno, got involved in his own crisis when a singer he was trying to sign was found dead in his hotel room. And Stephanie did not like how Melissa Nathan had tried to, I won't say cover up, but had tried to massage the PR around it and kind of create a lot of confusion around it and try to help David Bolno with good PR around it. And Stephanie Jones's view was like, this is a dead singer. Like, this is a crime. Like, we should not be like, how do we PR this? And so she didn't really like the way that Melissa Nathan worked, her methods, and didn't want to work with them. And she even at one point tells Wayfarer, like, if you've gone with her, I'm fine cutting our relationship and walking away. They didn't. They continued, but then Jennifer Abel got caught basically stealing documents, trying to take the clients and working on the defamatory website, handed over her phone and didn't delete her phone, I guess. Like, she's actually bragging about going into her offboarding meeting. I'm going to demand so many things. It's going to be great. And then, of course, they ask her to hand over her phone, and it has all of these text messages, not just of her planting all of this stuff and working against Stephanie Jones, but all of the Blake Lively smear as well. And now this is extended into Mihin Jin, who was at Ardor and Hyde. Like, she also had a smear campaign done by Tag against her. There's like, I think, a dozen smear sites now that we've discovered over the last decade that, they were involved in. So anyway, so Jennifer Abel has set up her own PR
Do you know what
company.
else? Like what other smear sites?
I do. Let's Peter Commissar is probably the big one. I will come back to that in a moment. Let me hold
Oh,
there. Let me
sorry,
finish on the
sorry,
Jamila Jamil, and
sorry.
then we'll come. No, you're good. Like, there's so much to this, right? So Jennifer Abel sets up her own PR company, takes Baldoni, and then also like Jamila Jamil is represented by her. And I had like left a message very early on in this, just saying like I was disappointed in Jamila. Like, you're represented by the same PR. There should be some sort of statement, even if you're not behind Blake Lively or something. Your PR is caught up in this huge smear campaign, and much of Jamila's platform has been about exactly this: the way that the
Yeah.
media and tabloids tear down women, pit women against each other, make shit up, and just like really use it for clicks and likes. So this is like in her wheelhouse. It's her platform, and she was silent. And then, like you said, the unsealing brought about all these text messages where she's not only mocking Blake, she's mocking Stephanie Jones as well. And then when people pointed out to her that, like, hey, this doesn't seem aligned with your platform and your views, decided to
Yeah.
just double down and just be the most hateful in response. And I don't understand
I'm
it.
shocked. I wanna know if I think she might genuinely believe that her text messages were illegally seized. I mean, I'm wondering if that is because of something that was said to her by like maybe Jen, or if she has a
Yeah.
misunderstanding of this happened on a work phone as well. So like there's that. Is there like why how could she, besides just maybe trying to lie through her teeth, do people keep because I called her out, I'm like, why are you DMing with a 24-year-old Swifty? Listen, I say this and people are like, that's a legal adult, and I'm like, no, 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 listen, okay. So I'm around Jamila's age, I'm not too far off, I just turned 42. Like a 24-year-old is an absolute child to me, God bless. And I don't mean that to discredit 24-year-olds. I just would not spend my time if I had just been nominated for an Oscar that day, and so would my partner, I would not spend my day arguing with a 24-year-old Swiftie in my comments. And I assumed that maybe she was trying to confuse her with the narrative that these were illegally seized or something, but they were accepted by the court and then they were unsealed, which means that that's not what illegal means.
Yeah. They've been trying to push this idea, right? Because obviously it's a big problem, right? If they can get rid of the evidence of all of the text messages. And what's interesting is, the text messages say, we can't write this down. And then there's a ton of messages of them writing down, talking about, we should boost this, we should plant this story with this reporter, we should do the, like, there's a ton of them writing it down after saying, hey, we shouldn't write it down. But the big problem they have, right, is, hey, if we can get that evidence dismissed or thrown out, so they're trying to say it was obtained legally, but they haven't filed anything to the court about it. And so this has all been a PR thing, right? They're putting press about it and they're talking about it online, but they don't want to file anything to the court. And I think that just shows like they know truthfully that there's nothing here that was obtained illegally. Otherwise, like if your lawyer doesn't then file something to get those illegal texts thrown out of court, they're not doing their job and you shouldn't pay them, right? Like, so I do think that I think that was the thing that got me was Jamila's messages and back just sounded so much like Jen Abel and the smear campaign itself. The same talking points, hitting the same notes. And yeah, maybe like you said, it's just a lack of interest. So the only way she's hearing about this case is through her PR and regurgitating it.
If I was running a bot farm, it would spell more things correctly. I wonder if there's a method to that madness where there's always like these typos and stuff, and I'm not sure if it's trying to make it seem like there's some like authentic sort of raged out idiot typing behind the phone by their like on their phone or whatever. But have you learned throughout any of this if there's a method to that madness, why so many bots are writing just like it's always the same poorly structured sentences with typos in them that are sort of blasted over and over.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is because, these are a lot of times people who are English as a second language who are posing as something else. Justine Baldwin is our like in joke because so many people get Justin's name wrong and call him Justine instead. And it's like you're so fired up about this case that you're going to go into everybody's contents and like talking with other content creators. We're like, oh yeah, I know that person. Like they're in everybody's content section, and you're so fired up about this, but you don't even know who you're talking about. Like, you don't even know his name. How
Yeah,
passionate are you on this topic?
that was someone was doing that to me. I was getting that yesterday on Threads where I had tweeted like, at Jamil, why'd you do this? With like
Mhm.
screenshots of that conversation. And it was like the nice parts, by the way. And someone was like, you need to give Jamie a break. Jamie does so much. And then at the same time, I got it like on both TikTok. I guess I'd call Jen Abel crisis PR, which is technically incorrect, but I mean, you double can't sue me if it doesn't seem like I know what the fuck I'm talking about. But I called her crisis PR, and at the same time, I got a TikTok comment and a Threads comment saying, like, you don't even know what you're talking about. Jen Abel is not crisis PR. She's just regular PR. And the Threads account that said that they had 10 followers that were all 8 of them were inactive. And the only thing they followed was the Daily Mail. And I was like, "We gotta do better than this." Like, I don't wanna tell anyone who's doing a PR smear campaign how to do their job, but we gotta do better than this. Like, it's so obvious, and I wish more people knew how to spot it because obviously these bot farms are disruptive to the landscape of our country at the bare minimum, but I think, like, it's one thing when the Kremlin is deploying these things. I feel completely different and I would almost say equally harmful way when bots are being deployed to sort of decide people's fate in the legal world. I find that just so troublesome that so many people are influenced by bots, and like you just see it all, people repeating the same misinformation that could have only come from like a soulless thing on social media. I just find it so disturbing because, like, one of the few core things that I think we have left in America is the justice system, and while it is flawed and certainly imperfect, it's like a core tenet of the Constitution. And so with the fact that this is able to play out this way now, where people are passively scrolling on their phone and digesting a narrative. I was even seeing this, Alan Jackson, who tried not just Kevin Spacey's case and Weinstein's case, but he also did Karen Reed. Recently he was representing this kid Fraser Baum out in the Palisades, who is on trial for killing 4 girls in a with his car off of PCH after speeding. Um, and I saw him try to get some organic looking things, but there was only one lady. Because now that I've seen it with Karen Reed, I can spot it anywhere now. And especially, I know Alan Jackson well, I feel at this point. And so, he couldn't get anything going for Fraser Baum. There's really nothing you can do to sympathize. But when he was on the Reiner case for just a couple weeks, his impact was so obvious, where, he becomes Nick Reiner's counsel, and then all of a sudden Nick Reiner's diagnosis is leaked to TMZ, as well as what he plans on pleading, which I don't know who else would know that except for his defense attorney. Then that story about Conan O'Brien not calling 911 at the party when other guests wanted to call dropped. And that is when the press went, it's quiet for 2 weeks, except for one story about how Nick Reiner got a huge allowance. And so my guess there is that whoever paid the retainer for Alan Jackson, because as much as Alan Jackson likes to talk as if he works for free, he's not taking on a celebrity case of this size without a retainer. I think that in a desperation after, this unfathomable event had happened to this beloved family, I would assume it was either a business associate or a close family friend who said, like, we'll help you with getting a lawyer for Nick. When they realized that it was going to be one of those things where everyone gets dragged through the mud, they said, cool off. Alan does the press conference outside the court where he says basically his hands are tied. And he is saying that, Nick Reiner, pursuant to California law, is not guilty. And you can take that to the bank, print that. And he tells on himself. So print that, to me, was a sign that this had something to do with how he communicates to the press. And so, since then, even though has the burden of attorney-client privilege, still, he has been continuing to feed stories out. And I know that because he is going on outlets like Billy Bush, who everyone should be afraid of Billy Bush. Like, what a nightmare that this individual is back in our program, And I don't think people realize that even just like how passively consuming material like this is, and I give views to like lots of things I don't like all the time, just because I feel like I need to know. But people passively consuming this stuff and they see Billy Bush, who maybe they even forget that he was a disgraced television presenter or something, or they don't recognize them. And these inflammatory statements, I'm just so bothered by it when it comes to now we're going after not just can you write an article like Amber Heard did, where she said that at one point in her life, she'd been in an abusive relationship, and you can sue someone and ruin their life for that. When it was like Depp's name was already pretty burnt at that point to begin with. But now, if you can't even claim or even say, I was sexually harassed in the workplace and they have been doing a massive smear campaign on me without bringing in a whole new slew of bots and an escalated plan, we're in a lot of trouble, you know?
Yeah. And I think that's where this case really highlights is like that intersection between lawyers and PR and how they're using it to manipulate courts and change public opinion in order to influence that. And one of the people you talked about, like, what are the smear campaigns are there? One of the other people who was named in having a smear campaign against her, right? So this whole nexus, this just Jed Wallace, Brian Friedman, Melissa Nathan tag nexus have done these smear campaigns against, like I said, at least a dozen other targets. One of them is a private citizen. Um, she has done nothing. She is a chef. She was on, I think, MasterChef. And they created this whole smear campaign against her because Brian Friedman was involved and it made it difficult for her to get work. When you look at this and you see the reaction that's having to somebody like Blake Lively, who, has all of these powerful Hollywood friends, who has Taylor Swift at her side, who can, has all of this money, who has a Brian Reynolds at her side and backing her, and she's fighting this fight and struggling in this way. What about all the people that don't have that? One of the briefs that was filed in this case was on behalf of an attorney by the name of Elise Darcy. And she also had experienced this. She had been sexually harassed. She brought a suit, and the guy had kind of weaponized and flipped it around and sued her to try and, not for any reason other than to just basically make her life miserable, invade her private text messages, and financially bankrupt her. So it's this pattern that we consistently see. And now with this, what we're seeing with Blake Lively is not only are we seeing these powerful men weaponize the courts, but you have somebody like Brian Friedman where, there's text messages that got revealed in the unsealing where one of the other lawyers at Brian Friedman's firm is worried that Jenny Slate is going to join the case.
Who, by the way, is the nicest. Can I just say something? Like, I don't wanna do, like, I know some of these people, but, like, Jenny Slate is a doll. Like, I don't see her. She comes from, like, sort of a humble background in terms of coming up in sketch comedy and everything like that. Like, she is as normal as it comes, you know? Like, dating someone like Chris Evans was sort of like a one-off. She's a very, like, private, normal person. And so it horrifies me to see this happening to her. There was a clip of her on a red carpet yesterday where they asked her if she'd seen the Oscar nominations and she'd said, no, she's not really on social media, which sad. But then, you know, like she just looked like she had like the life drained from her. And I just was like, after this discovery dump and everything, and like the inability to function like a normal person when you are like a normal, good person, sad.
No, I mean, any sort of litigation is just absolutely emotionally and financially devastating and puts you in all kinds of stress. And then to deal with it on top of this massive PR spotlight that's on you as well, and the press just constantly, people, TMZ putting out multiple stories a day, like it's a lot. It's a lot to deal with. But I was saying that his team were worried that she was going to join the lawsuit. And Melissa Nathan texts back and says no, because Brian Friedman went ballistic on her lawyer and manager today, and they swore no. Brian had said that her career would be over if she backs this horse sort of thing, and that he had no, they said that they had no intention. So like they're not only just like doing this, but like threatening and intimidating witnesses, creating these smear campaigns. And he talked about like, well, where else have they done this? Going back, like I said, to Scooter Braun, he and his business partner, David Bolno, got into an investment fund with a guy called Peter Commissar, high level banker.
Mhm.
That deal fell through and Peter wanted to sue them for a breach of contract. And they warned him that if they did, they knew the internet and they would smear him and they would say that, he was fired from his job under shady circumstances and he was about to lose his other job. He ends up 2 years later creating a lawsuit saying, hey, I'm suing them for breach of contract. And like 2 days after he files that lawsuit, there's a whole website set up that basically says he left his job under shady circumstances and his other job was about to be gone. And you're like, why would you do that after it's in the lawsuit? Like I said, there's like a dozen of these sites where they've set up these smear campaigns to go after these people, and it's all tied to like litigation to influence this. The fact that they've been able to do this for so long before getting caught here is incredible.
I saw that one of the things that came out in the discovery was that I think it was maybe Jen Abel or something was trying to place a story about Rebel Wilson when they
Hmm.
got a text from someone else saying, "Can you help with this?" And she said, "Oh my god, I'm, like, doing all these other things right now. I'm getting the Rebel thing out." And then there was also in the in the midst of all of that was a screenshot of like a video of Justin Bieber that was unflattering. I think he was yelling at someone to get away from him and his pregnant wife or something. And people were like, "Why Justin Bieber?" And then I think someone in the comments called it out. It's the Scooter Braun connection. Like, Justin famously was, I think, Scooter sort of the breakthrough client for him, if not his first client, and he left him quite famously. So it was like, I mean, to see how petty Scooter is and how it never really ends with him is just overwhelming. I can't imagine how suffocating that must feel for someone like a Justin and of course a Taylor Swift as well. You know, I noticed that before the Discovery dump came out, did you see that for like a day or two, there was some outlets, like not really super reputable ones, but some outlets were running a story about how Taylor and Travis had grown apart and like they're working things out. And I'm on, I'm a Swiftie and I'm also on a lot of Stan Twitter because I love music, but especially I love pop music. And a lot of Swifties were like, what is this story? Where's this coming from? And I wondered if maybe that was another thing to put in the media to sort of knowing that this Discovery dump was coming to sort of put that out there to cause even more trouble and division, even within Taylor's own fan base.
Yeah. And they have consistently used her name. Like the thing that gets wild to me to this day is Justin's team argued that Blake Lively had called up, or her lawyer had called Taylor Swift's lawyer or something, or that Blake had tried to intimidate Taylor to say, like, you have to delete your messages, or I'm going to expose you, or you have to put out a message of public support for me, or I'm going to like expose all your messages. And basically, she had blackmailed and tampered with a witness, was what they'd said. And then they just dropped it, didn't file anything from it. There was no evidence. They just put this whole story out there to get PR and then nothing. And then they didn't even depose Taylor Swift as a witness. And it's just like, it's what a world we live in where you can then just drag somebody's name into this. You can accuse them of blackmail, witness tampering crimes, and then just go, yeah, I'm good. My bad. And they were just doing it to like, we all know why they were doing it, to put a strain on that friendship, right? To really
Mhm.
isolate her. And when you think about just how devious and evil that is, where you're not just fighting a case in the court where you're trying to present your evidence and put your best case forward with good intentions. You are deliberately trying to harm a woman. You're deliberately putting this financial and emotional strain on her, and you're trying to separate her from her support base deliberately while you're doing this. And then you want to say that you're a good guy. I don't know how they sleep at night. I really don't. I really don't.
I will like you just have to be there's like another level of what has to be wrong with you if you're like, yeah, I want to fuck with Taylor Swift. Like that
Right.
just feels like to me like you're gone. Like that is like when most people would check into rehab. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I thought I could tangle with Taylor Swift. Like that was my that was my bottom. But I wanna know from you, just because you've been following this for so long, and I know maybe this is, like, an inappropriate way to say this based off of, sort of the subject matter, but, like, were there some, like, pet things for you that, like, you'd sort of been driving home or talking about or trying to track or wondering that came out in this that are maybe not the big things, but things that you got confirmation on or clarity on that felt personal to you maybe?
That's a really good question. I think for me, the big thing has just been the gaslighting in the complaint. When you talked about like, oh, when Justin's complaint came out, I really felt like there was a couple of things where he showed screenshots of things. And I'm like, the way that this is cut, the way that this is edited feels deliberate. I feel like I'm not being shown the whole story. And I think I'd posted about this on Reddit, and I'd made a couple of videos a little while back where I show like, hey, here's the screenshot we originally had. Here's the full screenshot. And he'd left out this context. And a big one was in his original complaint. There is a whole message from Melissa Nathan saying to him, like, I don't think we should plant any stories. We need to be really careful. We don't want to do anything. Right. And he put that in his complaint as like, look, my PR team was saying we weren't planting stories. We're not doing it. We got the rest of that message. And the second half of that message was, but we should start planting this narrative and start doing these things. And like, for me, that was really what has driven me in like really the outrage of this, right? Is not necessarily Team Justin, Team Blake. And I think it's terrible to reduce a very serious
Sure.
case like this to kind of like, hey, it's sports teams, right? No, this is not what any of this has ever been about. But for me, is one of the key things I talk about like a lot in my content, right? Is like integrity. And I have a phrase like say, you know your own behavior. I find it unacceptable. Like we all make mistakes, we all screw up, apologize, learn from the lesson and move on. But something like that, where you're editing a text message to drop the bottom half, where you're like, let's plant this story. And you use the first bit of it to say like, oh, I don't know. And say, oh, see, I wasn't planning it. Like, you know your own behavior. That is a whole nother level of deceit. This isn't you forgetting something. This isn't you being mistaken. This isn't say like him saying, oh, you look sexy, and Jenny Slate and Blake Lively saying to him, no, dude, that's gross. Like, no, say those things, right? Maybe there's a wiggle room in there. Probably not for Justin having this platform, but I think it's something that is experienced daily of, hey, no, that's not cool. That's one thing. Putting into your document, this woman is lying, she's telling all of the truth, and knowing that you're lying and misrepresenting it, I was like, that to me has been just really what's kept me going through this and kind of validating through a lot of like, you suck, you don't know what you're talking about, and all of these is like, I can very clearly see a man who is moving the camera so you only see little bits while playing that story and not being transparent. They talked originally, we're going to release every text message. And then they were like, actually, we don't want to release any of the text messages.
I mean, well, I remember there being an article that came out amongst all of this, and it's another toughie for me because it's like, I don't want to slander moms or anything, but it basically was like, who is pushing these stories? And the answer is it's a lot of like stay-at-home moms who, it's like boy moms basically. And obviously I'm not talking about mothers of boys, I'm talking about boy moms, a different breed. And I, when I read that lawsuit, I said, well, if you've read one lawsuit in your life, you know that this is not a real lawsuit. Also, setting up like a domain name for people to publicly read your lawsuit is like a level of psycho that I've never seen before. And it just, I mean, like, I don't like all of it was just so sensational that I can't believe that people fell for it. I mean, sure, like I definitely was like, what's going on with this? It ends with us stuff. I mean, maybe it is a little crazy that Blake's doing this or that, and in that, I think I also was saying, but like, we know better than this, but like, and I just don't know how once all that New York Times stuff came out, how people could fall for it. And of course, when Candace Owens gets involved, what people don't realize is like the insidious underbelly of someone like Candace Owens is that, Candace Owens probably doesn't really support Palestine. She hates Jews. Or like Candace Owens isn't really upset on behalf of Justin Baldoni and what Blake Lively did. Candace Owens has been working on undermining the Me Too movement for years and sees this as an extension of that. And so, it's just the motivations of other people, watching like perfectly sane people. I made a video right after Candace got involved where I said, like, this is tough. Like, I follow a lot of people that I know can be low info a little bit because people are busy and not everyone needs to be glued to their computer like me. It's probably a better life that you live. But I was like, if I am scrolling through my timeline and I see people I follow talking about Candace Owens, I'm sorry. Like, that's going to be a hard block for me. I just can't do this, especially in the middle of all the Karen Reed stuff I was dealing with. I was wondering, like, before we wrap up, I just want to pick your brain. Like, any other small nuggets?
I mean, you hit on the one there, right? Like that Candace is really motivated by the kind of tearing down the Me Too movement, because a lot of the creators and content creators who talked about this, that was also their angle, right? You talked before about Popcorn Planet, right? Big motivator there for Popcorn Planet is he's talked a lot about this and jumps on these cases to kind of undermine that. Another content creator, Dave Neal, did like a round table with a couple of other content creators, and like, they kind of used all of this as like a discussion of, has Me Too gone too far? And you're like, I'm sorry, what can like a dozen women complain to Sony about an inappropriate man's behavior and it go completely unnoticed, and your takeaway is that it's gone too far? Like,
Yeah.
no. And it's just, I think that's where like I come from, right? I talk a lot about, I came from, I'm a domestic violence survivor. I was in an abusive relationship. And there's a large part of that that is like, hey, our men just aren't credible, right? And even just talking that story, I know no matter how, when I share my story, there's always going to be a set of people who are like, yeah, but what did he do, right? Like what did he do to do it? And so I think, just generally, like we have a huge problem with credibility of when we're hearing these stories, largely because of all of the systems that we have set up to discourage, discredit, silence victims, and all of this is a fallout from it. And so, yeah, I mean, like, it's just, I don't know how at this point we're not smart to this, and we can't just say, hey, she's brought these claims to court. We can just sit back and see what happens at court. And understanding that, like, just getting to court, it's a high bar for a lot of these sorts of accusations, right? Even having the evidence to get to have a lawsuit already means she's got a ton of evidence. To get where we are,
Absolutely. Rich
and
people
the
don't file lawsuits willy-nilly.
yeah, and it's certainly not like Michael Gottlieb, right? It's not like he's looking for work, right? He's not like, which is a lawsuit I need to take on. Oh, I'll take this bottom of the barrel. Nobody's giving me work. But yeah, I don't understand why that is not the message out of this of like, hey, we should just let this go to court, let it decide. We don't need to tear down everybody in the meantime. But instead, we have these huge misinformation campaigns around it before the trials ever even started.
One last question, and I know I didn't like this question after Karen Reed when people said, "What trial are you moving to next?" I said, "I don't do this. Like, are you freaking kidding me? I
Yeah.
don't ever want to see another courtroom in my life." But I guess I do have a question. Once you're sort of tuned into this stuff, you can't help but sort of see the beginnings of it everywhere you kind of look. And I'm wondering if there's anything sort of maybe in the hopper for you, or if there's something maybe newer that you're noticing that feels a little touchy to you.
Honestly, no, right? I mean, I've been so deep into this and doing the research for this and really digging into a lot of the other smear campaigns. So I think more for where my eye is now is taking a step back from this case. Because I think it really is really important to remember that, like I said, Stephanie Jones was the one that started all of this because of her own defamation smear campaign. I think that gets lost in a lot of this, right? We talk about Blake Lively, but we don't necessarily recognize that. And as we start to pull back from that, like I said, there's like a dozen other smear campaigns, and now kind of saw the too long didn't read. A South Korean music producer, director, creative director, Mi Hyun Jin had her smear campaign against her. She's now talking to Stephanie Jones's lawyers, and so like from my eye, I'm really looking there at South Korea now to look at Tag's other smear campaigns. I'm really hoping that we see like some movement over there, because unfortunately South Korea has a very patriarchal culture. Their courtrooms are very closed off. So there's this fear that a lot of what is going on in the court over there is being swept under the rug. And so, she just recently talked to one of Jones's counsel here in the US. And so maybe we start to see something there of them going after Tag, and maybe see justice for her as well.
Expatriarch takes South Korea. I'm looking forward to it.
I love
But
South Korea. Beautiful place.
I know. Well, stay out of the north part, okay? Like, I just always worry. I'm like, I know that they do, like, vacations there. They're letting people back in. Don't go. But okay. Do you have a link tree where I can send everyone like all of your? Because I know everyone. Some people are more Instagram. You're fantastic, Brent. This was such a honor, like, and really a treat for me. Thank you for not just having this conversation with me, but for me being able to like share this with people. I know that they will really, I think there's a lot to glean from you, and if this is just a beginning, a jumping off point, for them to go find your content on all your platforms where you do really great work. I don't know if it's just my algorithm, but like you're always in it, dude. Like I'm seeing you everywhere. So shout out to you for doing the hard work. It is oftentimes incredibly unrewarding and certainly takes a toll on the soul. So I wish you, the best with everything. And I'm glad, that you it seems like you have a great partner. And, if you ever need an ally in me, like I'll always be there for you. So Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that, Molly. Thank you. And appreciate you having the time here to talk about this today and really kind of push back on all of this because super important. And honestly, yeah,
I've been
just
dying
didn't dawn on
to.
me.
Okay, well, hopefully, yeah, the verdict's gonna or like there's gonna be it's in February, right? The next
May.
May.
May's the trial. What do you, February's
Okay,
in
May
what?
is the trial. Okay, I don't know why I said verdict. They're not set. No one's settling, right?
So interestingly, they have said that they're not going to settle, but I don't know if you saw after the hearing this week, Brian Friedman talked to TMZ and they asked him about settling, and he's like, well, I don't know, maybe, like he started to give it. And they've kind of
He
put
looked
feelers out talking
lost.
about how Justin's really feeling the pressure of this. And like, I don't think Blake's going to settle. I don't think she settles without like a full apology and like, I could see her pulling a Taylor Swift and saying, I want $1 and a
Yeah.
public apology, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, they're starting to signal that he's struggling.
He looked bad. Like he looked bent out of shape, you know? So
Yeah,
here's hoping. Well, anyway, thank you so much for doing this. I will talk to you soon. I hope we stay in touch. And everyone,
absolutely. No,
thank you for being a patron, or maybe I'll put this up on the Trend Lightly main feed. But if you're listening to that there, thank you so much. And we'll talk to you soon. As I always like to say, God bless America. Bye.